Hello, welcome back. We're in Santa Barbara today, and we're going to have a quick look around this aeroplane. Now, if you've never flown an aeroplane before, then this video is for you. What we're looking at here is a Cessna 172. It is a learner plane. It is the best-selling aeroplane in the world. Okay, they've built more and they've sold more of these aeroplanes than any other aeroplane in the world. Okay, and there's a reason for that. It's because it's safe, it's reliable, and it's easy to fly. Okay, so there's a lot to be said for that. Fuel, where do we put the fuel? There we go. Look on top of the wings here. You'll see the fuel caps. It says avgas. That stands for aviation gasoline. Okay, you've got two tanks, one each side. They are independent. Okay, you climb up on the wing, you take that cap off, and you pour fuel into that until it's full. Then you do the same on this side until it's full. Okay, but that means you're overweight if you want to carry 4 passengers. It is a 4-seater aircraft. Okay, so bear that in mind. If your tanks are full, you're good to go with 2 people at sea level. Okay, but if you want to put 4 people in, then you only fill the tanks to half, because the plane has a maximum takeoff weight, and if you exceed the maximum takeoff weight, it simply won't take off. It's too heavy. Okay, so I'm quickly showing you around the aeroplane. Now there's a spike here. This is very important. I'm going to move along here and show you this. This is called a pitot tube. See that? That little spike? Now what happens there is air blows down through that hole at the front there, and it compares itself to, there's another little hole at the back. One's called dynamic pressure, one's called static pressure, but basically the wind blows down that hole, and on the dashboard here, this is your airspeed indicator. This is your speedo. And that's how you know how fast you're going, because the air is blowing down that hole, okay, and it's giving you your airspeed. That is your speedo. Okay. Now the other thing I'm going to show you right now is the gas. This is the throttle here. Aeroplanes don't have a pedal on the floor for gas. This is the gas, okay? You increase it to full power like a boat, you pull it back to the back, and that's going to idle. So now you know where your airspeed comes from, and you know where the gas pedal is, okay? This red one over here, this is the fuel cutoff mixture. Okay, so we want that all the way in, because the plane will not start. Okay, fuel will not get to the aeroplane's engine if we leave that sticking out. So you can click on this to get rid of it so you can see what we're doing. We'll turn the battery on. Now we will turn the beacon can go on. That's just like a flashing light on the tail there. That should be on. It's not on. Okay, well, we'll move on. Landing light, we don't need that. Taxi light can go on. Nav light can go on. Strobe. Maybe that's the strobe on top of the tail. So put some lights on the aircraft anyway. Now we want to start the aircraft. Now a lot of these aircraft have a pump, a primer pump, which you can pump, which is usually about here. This one's not fitted. Okay, this one's got a key. Now the key is slightly different on an aeroplane than it is on a car, because you just got ignition and start. Let's zoom in. Let's zoom in on this, and we'll see the difference. Trying to zoom in. There we go. We've got off, right, left, and both. Okay, and start. So the only difference between your car and this aeroplane is you've got right and left. Okay, and they're your magnetos. You've got 2 separate sets of spark plugs. Left set and the right set. Okay, so we would just turn the key all the way to start. And let's hit the start button. And it's not starting. Why is it not starting? Because the master switch isn't turned on. That's off. That's on. Notice you can turn. It's got a double switch, but when you press it on, they both come on. So now it should start. Let's give it some gas. Now it started. Now you notice this instrument's jumped in, and there's a few other instruments that are driven by suction, but we'll talk about them later. This is the main one I want you to concentrate on. This tells you how fast you're going. Okay. This one tells you how high you are. We'll set that to 0. You can turn that little wheel there. It's like a watch. The big hand tells you hundreds of feet until it gets to 10, and the small hand tells you thousands of feet. This is our rev counter. We know a rev counter from our car, don't we? We rev the engine. Rev counter goes up and comes back down. Now I'm not going to do mag checks on this. I'm just going to get the controls back up. Okay, so that you can see. On the end of the wings we've got those little flaps that go up and down. They're called ailerons. Okay, if we go back inside, how we activate them is we tilt the wheel from left to right. Okay, if we want to dive the aircraft, we push it forwards. If we want to climb, we pull it back. And if we look outside, there's the dive and there's the climb. Okay, so it's the tail that does that. Okay, pushing and pulling on the yoke raises and lowers the flaps on the tail. They're called elevators, and on the wingtips they're called ailerons. Okay, which leaves us with the rudder. There's the rudder pedals there. Let's look inside. Let's look down at the ground. Can you see those pedals on the floor? That's the rudder. Now the rudder does another thing. If we go outside, let's look at the front of the aeroplane while we're operating the rudder. Can you see that? We've got the nose wheel is turning. Okay, so that's activated along with the rudder, so we can steer the aircraft with the front wheel, but we have to use the rudder pedals on the floor. We're not turning the aircraft like you would with a car. Okay, this does nothing on the ground, nothing at all. I'm going to steer the aircraft on the ground. We've got the rudder pedals. Now also on top of the rudder pedals, I'll just get rid of this for a moment. Let's zoom in down here. We've got brakes. Okay, left brake, and we've got right brake, and we've got both brakes. And both brakes just let the handbrake off. That's the handbrake lever. That's like an old car. Okay, so you see the main wheels, the ones at the back. This has a brake, and this is activated by the right brake, toe brake, and the left wheel is activated by the left toe brake. So the brakes are completely independent. They are disc brakes, just like on a car, so you can operate one or the other. So when we're turning the aircraft while it's moving, we can apply the brake as well to make the plane turn a bit quicker. Now before we go flying, we're going to let the handbrake off. I'm going to put the yoke back in there, and we're going to look ahead. Now I'm going to go into VR because I like flying in VR. I'm going to put it enable, so I'll actually be looking around inside the aircraft, which is exactly how you would see the aircraft as the pilot or the student pilot. I'll get myself sitting comfortably. There's one thing I've forgotten to do. I haven't turned the radios on yet. See the radio stack there? Your instructor would do all this. You go on a first time lesson and the instructor will do this for you. I have this silly one thing here that never works. It's supposed to. That's the avionics master switch, which I should have turned on. Doesn't work. It's a pain in the ass. Okay, so I've got to do that with the mouse. Disable VR headset. Come back in here and turn it on with the mouse. Mouse does work. I'm trying to make this as simple as possible. It may be difficult for you to follow in VR, but I'm going to do it anyway. A lot of people have said, "Oh, it's too wobbly and shaky. I need the static." Well, you can do it static when you've got your own. So we'll let the handbrake off. Handbrake is off. Brakes are off. And we're in Santa Barbara. We've got quite a stiff crosswind there by the looks of it. See the windsock? That's blowing the wind across the runway from the left. So as we power the aircraft up, I'm going to go without flaps, okay? I'm going to talk about flaps on another time, okay? So I'm going to start by making sure we've got full and free movement on the controls. Yes, we have. And we're going to start increasing the gas, okay? We're going to push that black knob all the way in. And we're going to keep it straight with the rudder pedals on the floor, yeah? Because we're steering the nose wheel, don't forget. And we're going to wait until we get up enough speed to fly. So we've got to be in the green arc on the airspeed indicator. 60 knots, there we go. We are airborne. It's as simple as that. That is it. The propeller we're using in this aircraft is fixed pitch, so you haven't got to bother altering the pitch or anything like that. We're just looking at our rev counter. We've got a good rev counter going there. And we've got our airspeed. Down there, right on the floor, can you see that knob? That's your fuel tank selector. We can select left tank, right tank, or both. Okay, so we've got it set to both tanks, and we've got our fuel gauge over here. See that fuel quantity left and right? We've got half tanks. Just below that we've got our temperatures and our engine pressures. These are all things you'd expect to see in a car. Okay, there's the ocean. This is Santa Barbara. And all we're going to do is we're going to fly in a big circle. We're up at 1,000 feet now, so I'm going to bring the power back a bit. There's the runway. Now the reason we've drifted is because there's a crosswind coming off the mountains. So if I want to land back on that runway, I need to point over here somewhere. Because if I run parallel to the runway, I'll be blown towards the ocean. Wind is always something you've got to take into account. Okay, now there are some runways there, look. So we're going to land on an into-wind runway. Because we'd always be taking off and landing into wind. Okay? Because it makes the aeroplane go slower in relation to the ground. So it's important. So I'm going to land into wind. So we're going downwind now. We've got 1,100 feet, so we're going to bring the power back. I'm not going to confuse you with flaps, okay? I'm not going to use any flaps. You don't need flaps. People do use flaps in these aeroplanes, okay? You're all trained to use flaps, but you don't need to use flaps. I'm going to prove that you don't need flaps. So I'm going to keep it as basic as we can, and then in further lessons we're going to talk more about stuff that's going on the panel there, because there's a lot of things going on that are confusing you at the moment, and all I want you to think about is the airspeed. Airspeed, okay, and the altimeter, which is tells you how high you are, and your rev counter at the bottom. So the engine is idling. I've got the power pulled all the way back. I'm looking behind me, the runway's behind me now, so I'm going to turn the aeroplane into the wind, and it will slow down in relation to the ground once it's pointing into the wind, and we may have to apply more power. Okay, now the bottom of the green arc is where the aeroplane will stop flying and it will crash. Okay, it will fall out the sky and crash if you go too slow. So we don't want to get down into the green arc. We're coming in to land at 60 knots. Okay, 60 is good. That gives us a nice safety margin there. Okay, we're looking behind us, we're checking for other aeroplanes. We've got the runway ahead, slightly off to the left, and the speed's decayed, so we're revving the engine a bit harder now. You see that we're doing just under 55 knots, but 60 is good. Trickle more power. It's airspeed, airspeed, airspeed. We don't want to be going too fast, and we don't want to be going too slow. We're doing 55 knots, okay? As a student, you could come in at 60, not a problem. But you don't want to be going too slow because you will crash, okay? Definitely 100% you'll crash. You will do with what things called what's known as a stall. So I've reduced the power now. The nose has dropped, the speed's built up. I'm doing nearly 70 knots now, look. And the trick is we don't land. We raise the nose just above the runway, so we're skimming along just above the runway. Hear that noise? That's the stall warner. And just before you touch down, the stall warner should come on like that. And then we keep the aircraft straight with our feet, our rudder pedals, and that's it. That's our first flight. It has been completed. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to taxi back to the parking and let you think about that, let you watch that over and over again. And the whole thing with flying training is to keep doing the same thing over and over and over again and learning more and more each time, until it becomes second nature and you just know what you're doing. Okay, I'm not going to talk about holding points, I'm not going to talk about anything. I'm trying to keep this as basic as possible. So I'm looking for other aeroplanes because we don't want to cross in front of other aeroplanes. Naturally we'd be talking to the tower on the radio, but I'll talk about that later. This is the basic lesson for beginners, okay? Don't think about too many things, because this is one of the problems. You get overloaded with information on your first lesson, and you don't want that, because you won't remember. You'll just forget, and then your money's been wasted, because you'll have paid for a what they call it, a trial lesson, first lesson, and you'll be sitting in the pilot seat. Your instructor will be sitting there right next to you, and he's in charge of the aircraft. He's telling you and explaining everything to you, okay, and everything's done by the book. There's no hoorah Henrys allowed. Everything's got to be done by the book and completely safely. So we're going to taxi the aircraft back to, we're just going to say over here is the parking space. Let's just say the flying school is over here in this building. So we pulled the power all the way back. Okay, we got the stick pulled all the way back. And we're going to slow the aircraft right down, arcing it into wind. Okay, we apply both toe brakes. And the first thing we want to do now is we want to apply the brake. I'm going to come out of VR for this. Okay, so there we are in the panel. I'll just click on that to remove it so you can see what we're doing. We're going down here for the handbrake. See that? It's the handbrake. So the handbrake's now on, so the aeroplane should not be moving. Okay, the aeroplane is stationary, that's good. Back into the cockpit. Now we want to turn it off and get out. Okay, so you don't just, with the car you just turn the key, wouldn't you? And that's it. Not with this, we turn the avionics off first. There we go, see they've gone off. Because you can get a surge, an electrical surge, and it might damage these things, and they're really expensive, so we've got a separate switch for them. Okay, once the avionics is off, we can pull this red knob all the way out. That cuts the fuel off to the engine and the propeller stops. And we can turn the master switch off. We can turn all these switches off. And we can turn the key all the way off. Now there's loads of things I've left out, okay, in that lesson. Loads. Because there'll be other people going, actually you didn't do this, you didn't do that. No, I know. Okay. All I've explained to you is that the master switch is there. the avionics switch is there. We always switch the avionics on after the engine started, and we turn them off before we stop the engine. And we stop the engine by pulling the knob all the way back. Okay. Now there's a reason we do that. They don't do it everywhere. It depends on where you're learning to do that. I've heard Americans who just turn it off on the key and leave that switch all the way in. Well, you can do it that way, but the reason they don't teach it that way in the UK is because there will still be petrol in the engine. Okay, and if the battery goes flat, you can start the aeroplane by flicking the propeller around by hand, and it can lead to accidents if there's petrol in the engine. We'll talk about swinging propellers at a later date. You know, most pilots never ever swing propellers. Okay, they don't. But accidents can happen, so they feel it's safer in the UK to pull the red knob all the way out to starve the engine of fuel, so there's no fuel in the engine, so it's not going to start accidentally. Because if someone were to turn that key to the ignition on position and the battery was on, and someone was to turn that propeller, there's a good chance it could start, unless the fuel has been completely drained. Okay, and accidents do happen. They do, and so safety is paramount right from the beginning with pilot training. Okay, you don't want any unsafe practices, and that's it basically. That's your first go in the aeroplane. Now that lever there opens the door, and then you can get out, and that's your first go in a 172. And in the lessons following this, we're going to talk about other things. Okay, I'm going to briefly touch on other things. There's a trim wheel here, which you can see the indicator there. That will trim the nose up and down. And when we take off, we start with that. See the little white line there in the neutral position. Watch what happens. If we take it all the way forwards or backwards, we have to wind this to make sure we got full movement on it. But you have it in the takeoff position there, okay? And it's one of your pre-flight checks. You've got a checklist. You go through a checklist and you check everything. And we'll go around and we'll talk about everything else that's in the cockpit. But you know, when you come along on your first go and you're looking at the panel, you think, oh my God, there's just too many things there. Well, first of all, you ignore this, ignore all the radios, ignore that, ignore all three of these. Okay, these are circuit breakers, these are fuses. You just press them, make sure they're all in. Okay, some more circuit breakers there. This is vacuum pump and ammeter. This is like vacuum driven systems. Some of these systems are vacuum driven. If your vacuum pump packs up, the gauge will go off, so you won't be able to read it. But and this is amps. You check the amps are making it positive. So batteries being charged, your generators working, that sort of thing. This is the compass. This tells you which way you're going. This is the artificial horizon. This tells you the attitude of your aircraft in relation to the ground. The brown bit's the ground, the blue bit's the sky. This is an up and down meter. And this is a turn and bank indicator, which we'll talk about later. But like I said, in this lesson, you just concentrated on the airspeed indicator, the altimeter to tell you how high you are, and the rev counter. That's it. That's a compass, by the way, that's up there. I hope you've enjoyed that. That's like a beginner's guide to flying aeroplanes. That's a very, very, very basic lesson, okay? We haven't even shown you how to check the oil or done a walk around and check what's going on outside. But we've just explained about the airspeed indicator, pitot tube, which is that spiky thing there. They have a cover over them. And if you take off and you forget to take the cover off, no air can get blown down it and you won't have any indication of your airspeed, which is seriously important if you want to learn to fly. There's a step there which you can step on. There's a handle there which you can get hold of with your hand, and that'll pull you up so that you can check how much fuel you've got in the tanks. because your fuel caps are on the top there. There's also a stall warning indicator there. Don't know if you can see that little tab there. If you have the master switch turned on and you lift that up, it'll go beep. Like when we came into land, that's the stall warner, okay? So you check that. We'll do walk around checks in the next lesson. Thanks for watching.